caught my fiancé cheating. Right there, in the apartment we were supposed to move into after the wedding. But what crushed me even more than walking in on him mid-thrust with another woman was realizing his entire family knew. And not only did they cover for him, they went behind my back and got me fired from the very company I helped build from the ground up. They thought I was done. They had no idea. I secretly owned a controlling share of the company, and soon they'd be the ones on their knees. Before I dive into the full story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around to see what happened after I walked out of that apartment. It was supposed to be our night, our own version of a pre-wedding send-off. No parties, no strippers, no bachelor nonsense. Just him, me, a bottle of chilled champagne, and one last night tangled in each other before marriage turned us into boring adults. I wore a champagne-colored silk dress that clung in all the right places, with a low back and a slit high enough to tempt but not beg. Underneath, black lace from La Perla. I hadn't eaten all day. My entire body was humming with anticipation. In one hand, I carried a leather tote with takeout from our favorite French spot, lobster bisque, butter-seared cod with truffle risotto, and chocolate mousse in little glass jars. In the other, a bottle of Veuve Clicquot on ice. We'd planned everything. He texted me earlier that day, "Tonight, no distractions. Just you, naked, and maybe the mousse if you behave." I smiled the whole elevator ride up. The hallway was quiet, polished marble under soft light. The apartment door wasn't locked. I pushed it open. Lights off. Silence. Then I heard it. A sharp moan, thick and wet, like it was happening right beside me. I stepped in, heels clicking softly against the floor. The smell of sex hit before I saw anything. Expensive perfume, sweat, skin, something raw and metallic like bloodlust. And then I saw them. Lucas, my fiancé, was naked, kneeling on the living room sofa, thrusting deep into a woman whose head was thrown back in ecstasy. Her dark curls were a mess. Her silk dress was bunched at her waist, her thighs pale and tight around his hips. "Tell me I'm better than her," she panted, voice trembling. Lucas grinned and grabbed a fistful of her breast. "She doesn't know how to lift her ass like this." They didn't notice me. I stood there, frozen. My nails dug into the leather strap of the tote, breath caught in my throat. Every moan, every slap of skin, every disgusting whisper was another knife to the gut. And still I didn't scream. I just said, loud enough to slice through the room, "Champagne only stays cold for 3 hours, Lucas." She shrieked. Lucas spun around, nearly falling off the couch, his face drained of color. "Sabrina, it's not what it looks like." I cut him off as I walked calmly to the kitchen. I set the food down on the marble countertop, pulled out the mousse jars, and lined them up in a neat little row. Truffle cod, lobster bisque, and you chose her? Then I turned and walked away. No tears, no yelling, just ice. The elevator ride down was silent. Some older man in a tailored coat looked at me and asked gently, "Are you all right, miss?" I smiled. I just found out my fiancé prefers raw meat to French cuisine. I'm Sabrina Monroe, 31. I was senior brand director at Belmont and Hayes, one of the most prestigious luxury fashion houses in Manhattan. I had poured 5 years into that company, starting as an unpaid intern, staying late, skipping vacations, navigating sexist clients, manipulative executives, and
ego-driven board members. I was good. So good, they trusted me with everything. Campaign launches, celebrity partnerships, even damage control during crisis. Lucas, my charming liar of a fiancé, worked in PR. We met at a partnership pitch. His voice was smooth, smile disarming, suits always pressed. He called me dangerous in heels the first time we shook hands. I should have known. He proposed last Christmas with a vintage platinum ring passed down from his grandmother. He said, "This belongs in the family. Now it's yours." I thought it meant love. It meant control. After that night, I didn't respond to his messages. Not the apologies, not the desperate voicemails, not the ones that said, "I can explain." Instead, I went to work the next morning, wore my sharpest gray suit, blood red lipstick, walked into a pitch meeting like I hadn't seen the man I was going to marry ripping into someone else's body. I held it together. Until Monday morning. The email hit my inbox at 7:42 a.m. Subject line: Internal restructuring, effective immediately. 3 lines. My position had been eliminated. No explanation, no warning, no thank you. Just gone. At the bottom, under authorized by, Lucas Belmont. He hadn't just betrayed me as a partner. He'd taken a knife to my career. I packed up my office in silence. Nobody said a word. A few junior associates peeked from behind monitors, unsure whether to say goodbye or stay invisible. I didn't cry. I just walked out with a single cardboard box. The same kind of box I'd carried in on my very first day. Only now, I wasn't some intern. Now, I was the ghost they couldn't see coming. Because what Lucas and his family didn't know was that I owned 8% of Belmont and Hayes. 2 years ago, after I led the Milan expansion that tripled revenue, the CEO quietly awarded me equity through a private holding company. I never mentioned it. Never needed to. Until now. They thought I was buried, but I'm the one holding the
The thing about betrayal isn't the act itself, it's the calculation. The quiet ways someone who knows you, who's traced the outline of your spine, who's memorized the shape your body takes in sleep, uses that knowledge not to protect you, but to destroy you more efficiently. Lucas didn't just betray me, he strategized it. He knew the board's schedule. He knew the timing of my team's campaigns. He knew just when to cut me out to avoid internal resistance. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't just a name on the payroll. I was the company. I disappeared for 3 days. No social media, no texts, no calls. I didn't leave the city. I just left the version of me they all expected. I checked into the Upper East penthouse suite my father had gifted me after I made Forbes's 40 Under 40 list last year. No one knew about it. Even Lucas had never been there. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows for hours, looking down at the city that had both made me and tried to break me. And then I got to work. Step 1. Assess the damage. I started making calls, quiet ones, to former interns, now turned junior execs, to assistants, to finance girls who used to share cigarettes with me behind the building when we were nobodies. One by one, they confirmed what I suspected. Lucas had been planting the seeds for months. Whisper campaigns about my emotional instability, a faked budget error, one stage disagreement with a vendor he claimed I mishandled. It was sloppy, male sloppy, all show, no structure. He never expected me to stay quiet and dig. Step 2, locate the real power. The equity I owned was hidden
On paper, it belonged to a shell company called Citrine Holdings, registered in Delaware. Silent, but active. I hadn't touched it. Until now. I reached out to a discreet business attorney who'd once helped my father restructure a hospital foundation after a tax scandal. His name was Glenn. He was in his 60s, sharp as hell, and didn't ask questions. After reviewing the documentation, he looked up at me and said, "You're sitting on a grenade. You want to pull the pin?" I didn't even blink. "Glenn, I want them to eat the metal." Step 3, return quietly. I didn't storm in like a woman scorned. No, I RSVP'd to a quarterly stakeholder event that Lucas's family hosted every season. Black tie, roof terrace, speeches, and champagne flutes. He wouldn't expect me there. He thought I'd be hiding, humiliated. I walked in wearing a tailored black velvet gown with a slit that said, "I'm not here to heal, I'm here to haunt." Hair swept up, no jewelry, except the engagement ring Lucas had given me, still on my finger. Let them wonder, let them sweat. The room turned when I walked in. People always talk about silence as absence, but in that room, the silence was dense, tangible, like the air itself tightened. Lucas was standing near the bar, glass in hand, laughing with someone from operations. When he saw me, his face flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. I smiled, tilted my head, held his gaze. He walked over. "Sabrina," he said softly, like my name was a bruise. "You look incredible." "Careful," I replied. "Wouldn't want your current girlfriend to think you still like your ex-fiancé walking and breathing." He flinched. "Good." That's when Margaret Belmont, his mother, CEO widow, queen of whispered diplomacy, approached us. Her expression like someone had just tasted vinegar. "Sabrina, I must say you have a flair for dramatic entrances." I turned to her. "Not a flair, Margaret. Just timing. Speaking of which, I believe I have a motion to introduce tonight." She blinked. "Excuse me?" I reached into my clutch and handed her an envelope. Inside, a formal letter signed by me as the authorized principal of Citrine Holdings, issuing voting rights on Belmont and Hayes' board, 8% stake, enough to trigger a vote of no confidence in leadership. Her face drained. Lucas looked like someone had just yanked the floor out from under him. "I'm calling a vote," I said, "to remove any active partners with a conflict of interest stemming from sexual misconduct, abuse of power, and personal retaliation." I paused, and then looked Lucas dead in the eye. "I believe the company deserves better." The room erupted. Whispers, phones lighting up, executives in tuxedos pretending to check emails. Lucas tried to laugh it off, but his mother knew. Margaret wasn't stupid. I walked away. That night, in the privacy of my penthouse, I poured a glass of scotch, took off the ring, and dropped it in the trash. Checkmate. And the best part? This was just the opening move.
The fallout started faster than I expected. Within 24 hours, 3 things happened. First, Lucas went silent. Not a call, not a text, not even one of his smug little voice notes where he pretended to be sorry. He disappeared like the coward he always was once cornered. Second, Margaret Belmont called Glenn, my lawyer. She wanted to discuss terms. Glenn politely informed her that Miss Monroe would not be entertaining negotiations via phone. If they had something to say, they could do it at the emergency board meeting I had just triggered for Friday morning. And third, HR at Belmont and Hayes started leaking. Quietly, then in waves. Turns out, Lucas had a pattern. It wasn't just me. One former associate messaged me from an anonymous burner account. He used to ask me to stay after hours, said it was to review pitch decks. Then he'd sit too close, touch my wrist. He told me I'd be a brand manager in 6 months if I played the game right. I never did, and I was gone by quarter's end. Another woman, an intern I barely remembered, sent me a voice note through Instagram. Your story, your strength. I'm shaking. He cornered me once in the elevator, tried to kiss me. I said no. 2 weeks later, I was replaced. They told me the company wasn't the right fit. Over the next few days, I collected 12 statements. 12! 12 women who had been silenced, blackballed, moved aside, or gaslit until they left. They didn't have proof, but they had patterns. And I had power. Thursday night, I sat at my penthouse kitchen counter, surrounded by folders, timelines, and a half-drunk glass of Glenlivet. Glenn was on speakerphone. You've done the hard part, Sabrina. Now you just have to walk into that room tomorrow and show them the picture. I said, what if they don't listen? He paused. Then we burn it all down and start fresh. I smiled. I like that option better anyway. The emergency board meeting was held in the glass conference room on the 42nd floor, the one with the skyline view and the overpriced espresso machine no one ever used. I wore all black, tailored suit, hair pinned back, lips the color of fresh blood. Lucas was already there, sitting at the end of the table like he still mattered. He tried to look relaxed, but his fingers tapped the table in bursts of nervous rhythm. Margaret sat beside him, cold and regal in a steel gray Chanel jacket, her expression unreadable. The rest of the board trickled in. Then I walked in, and every head turned. I opened with no ceremony, no pleasantries. I laid out the timeline, the retaliation, the illegal termination, the internal campaign to smear my reputation. Then I presented the pattern. 12 women. 12 separate incidents, all with the same common thread. Lucas. The room went quiet. Even Margaret looked like she'd swallowed a shard of glass. Then one of the older board members, a man I barely knew, who always wore pocket squares and used synergy unironically, cleared his throat. Miss Monroe, he said carefully, are you asking the board to vote on formal removal? I nodded. Yes, effective immediately, from all titles and roles, including stakeholder privileges. And your voting authority? I smiled. Attached in your folders, page 3. They opened the manila folders I'd placed at each seat, and there it was. Citrine Holdings, 8.2% controlling share, voting rights active. Lucas stood. This is insane. You're letting her pull some soap opera stunt? Margaret interrupted him, voice low and lethal. Sit down. Lucas froze. Mother. Her voice was steel. I said, sit down, Lucas. You've done enough. The vote passed, unanimous. Lucas Belmont was removed from Belmont and Hayes. No ceremony, no farewell email, no legacy, just silence. And when he stormed out, eyes burning, mouth tight, I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up. Because I was busy signing the next motion, one that elevated me from silent investor to interim executive advisor. That night, I returned to my penthouse and stood at the window with a glass of scotch in my hand, watching the city flicker like a massive circuit board. My reflection stared back at me, sharp, unyielding, quietly victorious. I'd taken my power back. But this wasn't the end, not even close. Because Margaret Belmont may have let Lucas fall, but I knew a queen never abandons the throne without a plan, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite the rules. Not when I was in the room, not when I had the pen.
The boardroom battle may have been over, but the real war was just beginning. Because if there's one thing I've learned from 5 years in luxury branding and 3 months in survival mode, it's this. Take down the sun, and the mother sharpens her knives. Margaret Belmont didn't say much during the vote that removed her golden boy. She didn't raise her voice, didn't plead. She just sat there, hands folded, lips tight, eyes cold. But the way she looked at me as the room cleared, it was the look of a woman who'd just marked you for execution. The next morning, I received a bouquet of calla lilies, Margaret's signature flower. The note was handwritten in her impossibly elegant cursive. I underestimated you. That won't happen again. M.B. No threats, no warmth, just a declaration of war delivered in a $300 arrangement. I stared at the flowers for a long time, then tossed them, vase and all, off the balcony of my penthouse and watched the glass explode 30 floors below. Message received. A week later, I stepped into the executive suite at Belmont and Hayes for the first time as interim executive advisor. I didn't take Lucas's old office. I didn't need his stale energy or leftover air. I claimed the corner conference room instead. Glass walls, natural light, a panoramic view of Midtown. I had the furniture swapped out. Light oak desk, steel accents, a single orchid on the windowsill. Clean, focused, unapologetically mine. The staff was rattled. Whispers followed me everywhere. Sabrina's back? I thought she got fired. No, she owns a chunk of the company now. She took down Lucas. God, I hope she doesn't come for Margaret. They had no idea. Margaret was already coming for me. Subtle sabotage started almost immediately. My meeting invites would go missing from the calendar system. Key files would mysteriously get lost in the drive. A campaign asset I'd approved in writing would suddenly show up in a completely different format. And every time I asked why, the answer was the same. Oh, Margaret said she made an executive call. Of course she did. She was trying to push me out slowly, politely, the same way she'd tried to push out every woman who didn't play by her genteel little rules. But I wasn't going anywhere. So I watched. I waited. And I gathered proof. Glenn helped me quietly hire a compliance firm, all off the books, all legal. We traced email activity, contract adjustments, internal vote manipulations. It didn't take long to find the cracks. Margaret had been diverting campaign funds into a shell consulting firm advised by her brother-in-law. She'd been assigning no-bid contracts to vendors who were longtime family friends, with zero oversight. Worse, she'd been sitting on harassment complaints for a year, ones that should have been escalated, but were resolved with internal memos and hush money. And now that Lucas was gone, the complaints started pouring in again. Women who had been afraid to speak. Interns who were silenced. Assistants who'd seen too much. Margaret thought she was preserving the brand. She was poisoning it. I scheduled a private meeting with her. Just the two of us. No assistants, no lawyers. She walked in wearing a cream cashmere blazer, pearls, and a look that said, "Let's pretend we don't hate each other." I didn't offer her a seat. Before you say anything, I slided a folder across the desk. You'll want to look at this. She opened it, scanned. Her lips didn't move, but her left eye twitched. Just once. It was all there. The shell accounts, the silent payouts, the misappropriated budgets, the buried reports. I let her sit in the silence, let it stretch until it pulled taut like a piano wire. Finally, she looked up. "You've been very busy," she said. "I learned from the best. You want me out?" "No," I replied. "I want you public." That got her attention.
I leaned forward. You're going to resign. With grace. With a full press release drafted by my team. You'll cite health reasons, travel plans, a desire to support women in leadership. I'll even let you name your own successor. From my shortlist, of course. She stared at me. Like a statue. I continued. If you fight me, this folder leaks. To the board, to the press, to the compliance authorities. Margaret Belmont, queen of legacy and reputation. Exhaled slowly. When did you become such a killer, Sabrina? I smiled. Right around the time your son screwed someone else on our custom leather sofa. She resigned 3 days later. The press release went out at 9 a.m. sharp. Photos of her smiling beside me, like we were dear friends handing off the crown. After decades of extraordinary service, Mrs. Margaret Belmont will step down from her leadership role to focus on philanthropic endeavors and mentoring the next generation of female executives. She even got a standing ovation at her farewell toast. But as she leaned in to whisper goodbye, she said, I hope you enjoy the throne. It's heavier than it looks. I didn't flinch. I just whispered back, I've been carrying the company on my back for 5 years. This time, it has my name on it.
I didn't throw a party. No champagne corks, no grand announcements, no victory lap through the halls of Belmont and Hayes. Because the truth is, when you finally take the crown they tried to keep from you, the last thing you want is applause. You want silence. So you can hear exactly who's still whispering behind your back. The first week after Margaret's resignation was clinical. HR sent out transition memos. The board approved my appointment as executive chair pending long-term review. I stepped into her role without the velvet gloves. And people started to shift. The ones who once smiled with tight lips now stood a little straighter when I passed. The assistants who used to forget my meeting invites now triple confirmed. The men? Oh, they watched me with a new kind of caution. Like they were afraid I could smell weakness. And maybe I could. Because I wasn't just the woman who came back from betrayal. I was the woman who tore out the rot and stayed standing. 2 weeks later, Lucas tried to reach out. First, it was a text. Can we talk? Just once. No lawyers, no PR, just us. Then, a voicemail. I miss you, Bree. I was stupid. You were the only real thing in my life. And finally, an email. No subject line, no signature, just, you're everything I pretended to be. I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't forgiven him. I had. But forgiveness is a quiet thing, and Lucas didn't deserve my words anymore. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. Belmont and Hayes needed a full audit, a moral reset. I brought in 2 women I trusted, former colleagues who'd left after being pushed out by executive friction, a phrase we all knew was code for they refused to play nice with entitled men. One took over creative, the other, HR compliance. We started reworking everything, hiring policies, internship protections, vendor reviews, even how maternity leave was structured. By the end of the quarter, turnover dropped by 18%. Employee satisfaction hit record highs.
And for the first time in years, we saw real engagement from our emerging designers. Not fear, but respect. People started calling me the rebuilder. I didn't correct them. Then came the gala. Every year, Belmont and Hayes hosts a spring benefit for emerging fashion entrepreneurs, designers, women-owned ateliers, diverse creatives. It's our biggest industry night. Champagne, flashbulbs, media coverage, and half of Vogue's front row in attendance. Margaret used to run it like a royal wedding, scripted to the second. I did it differently. Minimalist, raw, spotlight on the talent. Less luxury, more truth. And I decided to give the keynote speech myself. I wore white, sleek, modern, tailored to the bone, like armor cut from silence. The ballroom buzzed with expectation. The same voices that once doubted me now leaned forward with polite admiration, their past criticisms swallowed whole by their desire to be on the right side of power. I walked onto the stage, looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some shocked, some quietly squirming. And I spoke. This brand, this legacy, has always been about power. But not just the kind printed on checks or sewn into suits. True power is quiet. It's the assistant who keeps the entire machine running without ever asking for credit. It's the intern who says no and walks away with her head high. It's the executive who gets fired for speaking truth and returns to own the boardroom. A pause. I know, because I was all of them. I scanned the room. This night isn't about me. It's about what we become when we stop protecting the wrong people, when we stop hiding behind names and start building futures with intention. Another pause. This company tried to erase me. Instead, I wrote myself back in with a pen made from everything they thought I lacked: clarity, resilience, and an unshakable understanding of my worth. Silence. Then, a standing ovation. I didn't smile. Not right away. I let it wash over me. Let them feel the gravity of what had just been said. When I stepped off stage, I didn't return to my seat. I walked straight out the back doors, into the spring air, and exhaled. Later that night, as I sat barefoot in my penthouse with a glass of wine and the city glittering beneath me, a message pinged on my private account. Anonymous. I saw what you did. Thank you. I was almost her. I was almost you. No name, no reply needed. Just truth. That's the thing they never tell you about surviving betrayal. You don't just recover. You rebuild. And if you do it right, you rebuild better than anything they could have imagined.
I didn't expect them to come crawling. Not this soon. Not like this. But 3 months after the gala, just as the company was stabilizing under new leadership, just as our first profit report hit record highs, just as I finally exhaled, they showed up. The Belmonts. In the flesh, in designer suits, in fear. It started with a call from Glenn. I just had the most interesting conversation with a lawyer from the Belmont family office, he said. Guess who's asking for a meeting? I didn't say anything. He continued. They want to discuss reintegration, long-term alignment of legacy assets. Their words, not mine. Translation? They wanted back in. Lucas was gone, publicly and permanently. After the board ousted him, he fled to LA to find himself. His social media was full of shirtless beach pics and thinly veiled self-pity disguised as mantras. Sometimes you lose everything to find yourself. No one was buying it. But Margaret? Margaret was a strategist. She'd kept her distance, let the press assume she was traveling, rebranding, stepping back. But behind the scenes, she'd been working the network. Whispers in luxury circles, rumors of a Margaret Renaissance. And when those failed, she came to me. The meeting was set at a private boardroom at the St. Regis. I arrived 10 minutes early, alone. No assistants, no distractions. Margaret walked in at 3:01 p.m. exactly. She wore navy, power color, a subtle diamond brooch on her lapel, face serene, not a line out of place. With her was Harold Belmont, Lucas's uncle, quiet, calculating. He hadn't spoken to me in over a year. We didn't waste time. Margaret folded her hands. "Sabrina, you've done well." I said nothing. Harold leaned in. "You've managed to hold the company together. Not just hold it, grow it." Still, I said nothing. Finally, Margaret cut the performance. "We want back in." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean after you helped destroy the brand's credibility? After you covered for your son, misused company funds, and buried harassment complaints? You want a seat at my table?" Her eyes narrowed. "This brand was never yours." I smiled. "And yet, here we are." She didn't flinch. "Let's be civil. What will it take?" I opened my notebook. "I'll tell you exactly what it will take." And I listed my terms. Full legal transfer of all Belmont family voting shares into a non-executive trust. A formal letter of apology to the board and all former employees whose complaints were silenced. A $2 million donation to a fund supporting women in creative leadership under my name. A lifetime ban from holding any operational role at Belmont and Hayes. They blinked. Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want blood." "No," I said softly. "I want balance. You took too much for too long. Time to return what was never yours to begin with." They left without agreeing. But I knew they would. Because when you take power from people who think they were born with it, they panic. And they always come back. 3 days later, the documents arrived. Signed, sealed. The Belmonts were out. Completely. The name stayed, for now, for legacy, for branding, for story we could rewrite on our terms. But the bloodline? Cut. That night, I returned to my apartment, poured myself a glass of Barolo, and stood in the same spot I had stood the night I caught Lucas cheating, 3 feet from the front door, facing the skyline. Except this time, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I wasn't ruined. I was in control. And for the first time, I understood. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like a pen, a clause, a signature. Sometimes it looks like silence, where a name used to be. One of the interns, Anna, bright-eyed, fierce, stopped me in the elevator the next day. "Miss Monroe?" she asked softly. "Is it true the Belmonts are gone?" I smiled. They finally realized they were holding the door shut while the house burned. She grinned. "Thank you. For everything." I almost told her I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. For every night I stayed quiet, for every smile I faked while men talked over me in meetings, for every raise they gave to someone else, for every time I swallowed the truth to protect someone who wouldn't do the same for me. But instead, I just nodded. And I walked out of that elevator taller than I ever had been.
It started as a whisper, a rumor on a fashion blog. An anonymous tip slipped into a journalist's inbox. A sentence buried in an industry newsletter.
Sabrina Monroe to launch new division at Belmont and Hayes. Full control, no legacy ties. And then it spread. Fashion Week called, Business Insider, WWD, even Vanity Fair reached out for a profile. But I didn't speak to any of them. Not yet. Because this next chapter wasn't about headlines. It was about building something clean, sharp, and unstoppable. A brand that couldn't be traced to betrayal, nepotism, or the remnants of a family name that had rotted from the inside out. We called it Monroe Studio. Minimalist, genderless, ethically sourced, designed by women, led by survivors, and built for the bold. It wasn't just fashion. It was resilience woven into every thread. We held casting calls for models who'd never walked runways, recruited designers who'd been rejected by the industry for being too political, too loud, too raw. Our first line was reconstruction. Not just a concept, a war cry. Corsets made from recycled suiting fabric, blazers with clean slashes across the chest, like open wounds turned into art, dresses that flowed like power being rediscovered. The night of the launch, we hosted an invite-only preview. No press, no cameras, just our people. As the lights dimmed and the music pulsed low, the models began their walk, not with the usual cold, detached strut, but like they were walking out of fire and into purpose. In the back row, I watched. Anna stood beside me, now head of communications, her face lit with pride. She leaned in and whispered, "They're going to lose their minds when this goes public." I didn't smile. I exhaled. Because I hadn't built this to prove anything. I built it because this was the future. A week later, the Vogue piece dropped. Front page, full spread. Headline: She was erased by her fiancé's family. Now she's rewriting the rules of fashion. They called it the rebirth of Belmont and Hayes. But they were wrong. This wasn't a rebirth. It was a rebellion. And it had my name on every wall, every label, every damn seam. That same day, Lucas sent one final email. No subject, just a single line. "I see it now." I didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. I wanted it there. A tiny grave marker in my inbox. A reminder of who I was and who I'd become. Months passed. We sold out our first 2 collections. The waitlist for Monroe Studio grew by the thousands. But I kept my circle small, my purpose clear, my hands on the steering wheel. No distractions, no false forgiveness, no return to softness that didn't serve me. Because the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't taking back control. It was realizing I never needed to beg for it in the first place. And one night, quietly, with no one watching, I took the ring box from the back of my drawer, the one with the vintage platinum ring. I walked down to the Hudson, opened the lid, and dropped it in. No drama, no speech, no ritual. Just a clean fall, and the ripple that followed. I wasn't just the woman who got cheated on. I wasn't just the girl they fired. I was the storm they didn't see coming, and the calm that followed when everything else had burned. So if you're listening to this, if someone tried to bury you, remember, you're not broken. You're the blueprint, and you haven't even started yet.